In the last section, we laid the groundwork for developing a situation model. In the following presentations, we will walk you through the steps in this process. This section focuses on defining your program scope, which may be geographic or thematic, defining your biodiversity focal interests, and identifying the ecosystem services those biodiversity focal interests may support and the human well-being interests that may benefit from the ecosystem services. Defining your biodiversity program scope is another essential, yet frequently overlooked step. Your program scope and your biodiversity focal interest will be linked to your results framework if you are designing a project. It will be linked to your project if you are designing an activity. Your biodiversity program scope defines the broad parameters or rough boundaries for where or on what your program will focus. Your program scope can be geographic, which might focus on the biodiversity of a specific place, like a protected area or group of protected areas, a region or province, a watershed, or a type of ecosystem. Or it could be thematic, which might focus on a focal interest, threat, or strategic approach. For example, a national coral reef conservation program focuses on corals, which are a biodiversity focal interest. In almost every case, even when it's thematic, the scope will be geographically mapped, which clarifies the program boundaries. For more guidance on defining a program's scope and biodiversity focal interests, you could consult page 12 of the USAID Biodiversity How-To Guide 1, and also page 7 of USAID Biodiversity Supplemental Guide 1, Defining Scope and Biodiversity Focal Interests in USAID Biodiversity Programming, which you can find at the link below. Throughout these interactive how-to guides, we will be using a fictitious example based on a real-world situation to illustrate the process of developing a situation model and a results chain. It is the same example used in the USAID Biodiversity Programming how-to guides. In this example, our Grand River project example, the design team defined their biodiversity program scope as terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems of the Grand River Basin. In the situation model diagram, this is illustrated with a green scope box. Sometimes, a team might provide a short title to their scope, but they may have additional details that further define their scope and clarify where they will focus and, just as importantly, where they will not focus. For example, in the Grand River project, the team further defined their scope by clarifying that working in the Grand River Basin will include close collaboration with neighboring municipalities that share the ecosystems of the Grand River Basin. Now that we have looked at defining your biodiversity program scope, we'll complete the second step in developing your situation model, defining the specific biodiversity focal interests that your program is trying to conserve or restore.